Good evening, everyone, and I thank you very much for coming out, especially with the weather. We are here, public informational meeting for the 2023 Street Improvement Project. This will be the first of what I anticipate will be two meetings. This one is going to be more the high level. Really want to start the dialogue with people, let them know what the city's goals are, get some of the the information flowing in that dialogue, as well as to introduce the staff and such that if you have questions, we don't sit in our offices just kind of wondering what's happening. We really do like it when people reach out to us. We look at the phone. We really do like it to ring, because hopefully that's when we get information feedback from. That's how we know whether we're doing a good job or bad job. What we don't like is at the end of the project when we get it and say, why didn't you do this or why didn't you do that? So we like to try to start some of these conversations early so we can get feedback, because we want this project not only be successful from our point of view, but successful from your point of view as well. We may not be able to do everything you ask of us to do it, but we'll definitely try to work with you as much as we can on things as they might come up as we work through this project. So I've got about, I always say, whatever I say usually takes me about twice as long because I have a tendency to talk. But I like to say it about a 10 to 15 minute presentation. I said just a few slides, but a few things I thought were important to introduce at this time. And then it's kind of just really we're here to introduce ourselves and to answer people's questions, at least, and give you as much information as we have at the moment, as well as if you've got some concerns, we'll take those back, and then we can have time yet in this project to develop a response for you and get back to you with something at a later date. So with that introductions, since I'm the one talking, I'll introduce myself first. I'm Scott Badoon. I'm the Director of Public Works. I'll start here to my left.
Ryan Karnowski, I'm the Director of Community Development.
Joel Lemke, Director of Public Utilities and Transportation.
Joe Skavinsky, City Engineering.
Jason Pliskar, Utilities Inspection.
And there are a few other people that are not here. Craig Schakowsky from Utilities is not here. And just walking in, Dan, if you don't want to introducing yourself.
Dan Woodchuck, Public Facilities.
And the other one that's not here today is the City Forester. If anyone has any tree issues related to the project as we go through, Todd Ernster is the one to call. It's the person that we also rely on. We don't make any decisions from the engineering perspective without first consulting with him as well. So he's very much a part of the project. Before we move on beyond this, I always find it's very important, and I'll reiterate this at the next PIM. And for those that are on the recording, unfortunately, you can't see this, but the people sitting to my right there are probably the three most important people in this project. And that's because they're the people that are going to be out in the field when things are being constructed. So if there's an issue happening out there, that's the first line of defense right there. So you definitely want to, you'll see them a lot. Those faces will look like your neighbors. You'll wonder if they didn't move in next door, but they're going to be there and taking care of the issues. So as things come up, that's the first place to go, because they have the direct connection. They're working daily with the contractor. So if there's something that they can address right on the spot, they can do that. By all means, you can call me, you can call any of the director's stuff. We can try to get something done. I'll just tell you that that's a much faster route to talk to these gentlemen, and they will take care of issues there, and they're very good at doing what they do. So project limits, there was a map. This is just a copy of the map that was sent with the letter. This is actually a relatively small, it's a large project, but still smaller than what we've tackled the last few years. But this one consists of Minnesota Avenue from Clark Street down to Jefferson, Algoma from Minnesota to Texas, and then Texas from that northern termini just behind Len Dudas Motors southward to Jefferson Street. Just briefly on corridor history, a lot of people kind of ask why, are we doing this project, and just kind of getting an understanding for that. So first, these functional classifications for the roads that we're doing are all local roads, and that has a bit of bearing on kind of when projects like this are selected. Those classifications are actually given to us by the DOT. We don't make those up. They have a process by which they identify roads. There's basically three tiers of roads: local being the lowest level of road, collectors being the next highest, and then arterial roads above that are identified more through those commercial areas, those roads that are pretty much designated for commute traffic and whatnot. So these are all local roads, and that we'll be working with there. A little bit on the pavement. The original pavement we have is, records, some of the pavement seems to date back to the 50s. The newer stuff is relative to the 70s, which mostly had to do with storm sewer installation at the time. We use a system that the state also requires us to do called PACER, which is the next item there on the slide. And what that is an evaluation software. Every local unit of government is required to use the same system when rating their roads. And the reason for that is so that we don't have different municipalities arguing about how poor their roads are to say, hey, give us more aid. We're applying for a grant. We're applying for aid. We need more. Ours are terrible. It just makes sure that everybody's doing the same thing. And that works on a scale. It's actually just a visual scale. So you're really looking for distresses in the road, and that's how you always get there. So there's some variability to the results to get it depending upon how people look at roads. But it just identifies as the distresses at the surface to try to identify what the failure modes are that are really causing it. It's on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 would be a brand new road, which is what you'll have when we're done. And 1 would be a road that's really in need of repair. It still has maybe a little bit of life in it, but it's probably not going to last too much longer. And we actually have a 1 in this. Minnesota is actually rated by our staff as a 1. And I think most people would agree that the pavement is actually in pretty poor shape. The other, Algoma and Texas, are rated as 2, and that's typically where we try to target local roads in, are kind of in that 2, depending upon how much maintenance we're putting into it or how well it rides. We may let it, in the instance of Minnesota, until we have a larger project and deal with it at that time. So in that 2 range is about our target. So these roads are right into the target area we otherwise have. I think even from driving them myself, they're a little bit there. I think there are roads that actually look nicer that drive worse than these, but that's kind of where we always get how we pick these, along with looking at the utilities. I don't know, unless anyone from the utilities, Joel, if you want to talk about the utilities, I think look at the slide. They're also old and in need of repair.
Yeah, that's the cliff notes, right? Sometimes the age of the utilities is a little misleading. 30s to 60s is doesn't exactly represent condition. I'd put condition is usually reverse that 60s to 30s, with 60s being worse sometimes than the 30s. But in this case, there's quite a bit of clay pipe. There's some undersized stuff, so it's old, needing replacement. We can get into specifics if you need to on certain blocks, but since
It tells me I missed one here.
backspace, does that take you back?
Won't let me go back and read.
We're just thankful he's not the Director of Information Technology.
Yeah, that would not be good. You won't let me go. No.
Oh, moving on.
All right. Well, we'll go with this slide and see. Maybe I just have them out of order in my mind. I apologize. Project schedule. So moving forward from today, I said I otherwise intend to have another public informational meeting sometime, hopefully in the late February, early March timeframe, to go through some of the details that we otherwise have developed, because the engineering should be near completion at that point in time, so we can share more of the specific impacts to properties at that time, which we may not have answers for today. With that, then trying to look to bid this project, to find a contractor in the March-April thing. My goal would be to award a contract at our April round of meetings. If we're on that sort of schedule, I would anticipate we'd have our plans out, so we'd have utility locates, hopefully starting about that time. And by utility locates, what I mean by this is actually the other utilities. This should be WPS, electric and gas, TDS, Charter, AT&T, those sorts of utilities. The best way to streamline these projects is they get out a little bit ahead of us, so we're not tripping over each other. However, there just seems to be so much work here. The last few projects that's been a little bit more challenging. They've got plenty of work to do, and it's not always possible to get them here as early as we would like to see them. They do work kind of on their own schedule. We try to work as best we can to get them here when it is most beneficial for us. So you might see that they may start a bit early, and some of that work may happen concurrently. But one of the things I bring that up is sometimes people will see that there's someone's cut open the road or removed the sidewalk in a place, and they immediately call us and say, I didn't realize this project was starting. And it's really that. It's probably not us at that point in time. It's just someone coming to maybe put in a new gas valve or something like that, or relocate some electrical or something that's otherwise buried there to get it out of our way. We anticipate that our contractor will probably be in there sometime in May. When exactly, I don't know. That'll depend on, whether they have the supplies, the availability of crews, what the weather exactly is like there. But I like to think sometime, in May we would get started, and then wrapping up a project like this, that it is a little bit smaller than some of the other ones. I would think even potentially late October. So probably late October, but at least by November, early November, we should have it all buttoned up. Contractor to otherwise be out there. So it is going to, the overall project, take the summer to complete. It's not something we're going to just be able to get done in a few weeks. And I definitely did miss the one slide there. I apologize. However, in record mode, it's not letting me go back. So let me talk a bit about that one. Then I'll go into the sequencing, which that slide was, what is this project consisting of? And as this one is a total reconstruction project, this one is, it's the removal of everything at the surface. So anything that exists there, sidewalk, curb gutter, pavement, will all come out. But not just the surface elements, because everything that's below ground that the city owns will also be replaced. So that is the water main, the sanitary sewer, the storm sewer, and the laterals from those main lines out to the right-of-way line. So we'll come in and contractor will remove absolutely everything and replace it all. So when we're done, everything that you can see and everything you can't see will be new. The nice thing about that is that, for anyone that's maybe younger than I am, says we will hopefully never be back, because this is a project that should really be that once in a generational type project. So we'll get it done, we'll be gone, and then you can just enjoy it after that. In addition to replacing things, we do have some new stuff, and that was why the importance of that slide is that not every place in here currently exists. Minnesota, Oklahoma, Texas, at least in certain portions of those, currently don't have sidewalk, don't have curb and gutter, don't have storm sewer, and those are things that we will be putting in. And again, I apologize in the slide because I was just going to talk about that a little bit, because that was probably the biggest piece of information I wanted to pass along to everyone, is kind of the reason why we've otherwise come up with that. And the reason for all of that has to deal with sidewalk. The council has otherwise made a concerted effort to try to improve the walkability of Stevens Point. So we do look at those things when we're looking at these projects to see where can we make improvements to it. And that's really the whole reason I brought Director Karnowski here today. He doesn't necessarily always attend these meetings, as they often get into the construction thing, but I thought it was important enough to otherwise have him here. And Director Karnowski, if you would talk a little bit about what that means in an area like this.
Sure. So specifically, you've got a few major employers, Warzala and the grocery store. Having sidewalks, getting folks off of streets and onto sidewalks is a really big component of just pedestrian safety in general. Additionally, outside of that, you've got pretty easily access to those stores along Main Street, those being like Pineries Bank. There's a laundromat over there. So other areas that people may walk or bike to and feel more comfortable off of the road and on a dedicated sidewalk to get folks from point A to point B. So I know city staff is pretty supportive of putting sidewalks in this specific area for those specific purposes.
Thank you. So kind of looking at that and trying to see how we can get sidewalk in, when we did some of the preliminary engineering, and we were trying to otherwise figure it out, because we didn't want to be too drastic in our approach, because that's never really our intent to come in and totally, some people may say, you're changing, the neighborhood, and that's never really our intent to do that. So we looked at, originally to see how we could work without curb and gutter while still fitting in the sidewalks. And unfortunately, given the width of the right of way, we just couldn't get that all to fit. So, and that being an alternative to curb and gutter is swales. And I think there were some swales, at least along in this stretch before, and that's really just a shallow depression along the edge of the road so that the water runs off the road, sheds down, and then it actually, the bottom of that swale would be beneath the pavement edge so that water infiltrates in there. And since there's really not a flooding issue within this area, it's very sandy soils, we felt that would be an adequate way to continue on with the stormwater management. However, just to try to fit the sidewalks in, which in addition to the constraints of the 50 feet right of way, is just kind of how the vertical elevations between the road surface and the yards, the private property fit. We couldn't get that to work, so we ended up going to the DNR and asked them about what maybe we could otherwise do, and it was really much to my surprise. I know I've talked to a few people, and I said I didn't think the DNR would really allow us without doing a lot of treatment, objective stormwater treatment, before we could discharge it. But they actually very quickly gave us concurrence to say that the way the street, that again, it goes to that vertical elevation, how the surrounding properties are higher than the road. They say it's very much acting like curb and gutter at the moment as it is. So they didn't have an issue with us doing it. We didn't have to improve or change any of the treatment characteristics, because those can be very expensive to install to begin with, and then they're very high maintenance after they're installed. So if we can't necessarily do swales, we often, we're often, tight to figure out another solution. So, so for anyone I did tell you that was unlikely to happen, I apologize for this meeting because it was a surprise to us as well. But with their concurrence, then we are going to move forward since it fits the best. So it's not about the stormwater issue so much to add curb and gutters. It is to just fit in the sidewalk. That was our goal, to get there, to get it to work. But in order for that to work, it is requiring us, given the constraints, to go to a curb and gutter. So that catches me up to where we are here, which is project sequencing. A lot of times people ask, well, how is this really going to work? What's it going to look like when the contractor shows up? And while this isn't a lot of detailed information, it's trying to really capture the fact that we're going to try to control that. We want to make sure that they can finish the project, but we don't want it to look like a war zone. We're not going to allow the contractor to come in and remove all the pavement for the entire project and then start someplace. They're only going to be able to kind of remove pavements for areas that they're going to be working on. So it'll be kind of block by block sort of thing. And for those that maybe are at the front end of the project, and I don't know where the contractor may start, we don't dictate that to the contractor means and methods. Generally speaking, it's going to be dictated by gravity sewer. Usually start at the bottom, work your way up. So they're going to take the deepest sewer and start there and work their way up, most likely. But that's the approach. So we don't do that, but we want to make sure they get done. So if they can bring in multiple crews and prove to us that they can be efficient, we may have crews working in different areas, but it's all about making sure that they're working within those areas. We don't want idle time where a road is tore up and you have to drive through that, or it's maybe it's still possible to get to your driveway, but it's very difficult to get to the driveway. We don't want to deal with that. We want to make sure that it's as convenient as possible for those that are going to be disruptive, because construction just is. It's disruptive, and we understand that. And unfortunately, there's just no way we can do this at night while everyone is sleeping. If there was, we certainly would take that approach. I apologize, there's something else I was thinking about there, and I forget now. Yes. So for those people, I just want to always be clear, because we often get comments on this, is that the people that are at the very front end of the project, yes, you're going to be the most impacted throughout the project. And the reason being is that before they can come in and pave, we're not going to come in and pave block by block when they're done. So they're going to come in and do utilities. And that utility work is going to be done in such a way you'll probably see them pass by 3 times and wonder why that is. And then they'll come by actually a 4th time and you'll wonder again why that was. And usually that's because each utility is going to be installed separately. They can't open up the entire road and install 3 utilities at one time. So they're going to come in and put sanitary sewer. They're going to come in and put water main. They're going to come back in and put the storm sewer. And then they're going to come in and connect the laterals throughout that project in there. So it'll kind of repeat itself as you go through it. Then they're going to start to build the road. And so anyone on the front end of the project, they're going to have to operate over gravel, because they're going to have to get so much project done, which is going to be more than, say, the block that you live on, before they're going to call their subcontractor to come in and do concrete. And it's going to be before they call the American Asphalt and have them come in and pave it. Once they're done with utilities, we'll work with them to make sure that they build a suitable road surface, but it's just not going to be complete until much closer to the end of the project, when they'll bring in those contractors and they'll do the concrete work, and then they'll pave shortly thereafter, and then it kind of wraps up very quickly. Some people otherwise say they want it done, and we understand that, but it's not necessarily practical to keep bringing contractors back and forth to do that. It's not efficient for them. It's not cost effective at all for us. Joe, got anything else on that? And then lastly, I just have a couple slides on frequently asked questions. All these were in with the letter that we otherwise sent, but I thought a few of them were important enough just to kind of mention here tonight. So the first one here, kind of as I was alluding to, will I have access to my driveway? To the greatest extent, practically yes, but with that, there will be times that you will not have it. So through utility construction, maybe are they working right in front of your house for that day? You may not. Tomorrow they'll move on, and you're back in. That sort of thing happens, quite a bit. So anticipate a fair number of short durations that you may or may not even notice, depending on where they are. It may happen while you're away for the day, and you don't even realize that there was a period of time you couldn't get in or out. However, when we get to especially concrete at the end of the project, concrete takes a little bit of time. So I would anticipate there could be potentially a week or two even there where you may not have access to driveways or waiting for concrete. You're going to have to set the forms. You're going to have to pour the concrete. There'll be several pours, and then have to wait for that concrete to cure. And just the cure itself is at least 7 days before we can allow people to drive over it. Otherwise, it tends to fail prematurely. So we figure there's already kind of a week built into that overall process. So we'll have to do that, and we'll be identifying areas to park nearby. Street parking is relatively easy for us since we control that. And that's where we otherwise look to see if issues come up regarding that because there just isn't enough parking available. We can look at other options, but otherwise I'd anticipate it would just be parking the street. We would work with PD to eliminate the overnight parking restrictions. So as long as it would be a legal parking spot during the day, you would be allowed to park there overnight. The second question, probably the second most often question, will be assessed? And there are some things we're doing, which would be the curb gutter, the storm sewer. We no longer assess for sidewalk that, under our current policy, are assessable items. At the moment, because I think, since we've kind of changed the approach to assessments, I'm not saying that they're going to be assessed, and that's where I guess I could have introduced you before. District 7, Alder and Ebone is in the audience. My goal, and I believe Director Lemke on the storm sewer, since he controls that, is the utilities. I plan on going to the Board of Public Works next month and ask them what their thought process is on the assessments. To give you an idea what it is, we're still using our basic assessment policy. It was last revised in 1990. So it's definitely in need of revision. We have made some changes that haven't been incorporated into it, and I think it's a question worth asking versus me just making an assumption of what it is, since the council's already weighed in on the sidewalk component. I think it'd be worthwhile. So at this point in time, I don't have an answer for that, and I think one of the things that I'm sure the council will be asking for, we're going to try to do in the next few weeks some calculations to see what those assessments could be if they were to be imposed. Net, but even today I don't have an answer for what that would be, but just wanted everyone to be aware that there is a potential for some special assessments on this project. Joel,
and on the same hand, we really don't plan on the kind of assessments that have been seen in the last few years related to infrastructure for stormwater. The difference here being in that the last few years we've had projects in parts of town where there's higher groundwater potential for water issues. And also, even though this area of town, the housing stock is definitely newer than where we've been the last few years, it still doesn't matter because we're looking at a 100-year cycle here, right? That's what we hope, is to get back to this project in about 100 years after this one's done. So how many new homes will there be? What kind of utilities are needed? Out there, we know groundwater's low enough, nobody's going to need a stormwater lateral. On other parts, we do, and that's what we assess a lot for normally. Here, we're talking other stuff. But to Scott's point, we need some feedback, guidance, and decision-making from boards and commissions before we know what that is.
One of them that I think is probably more kind of a question nearly for us to ask everybody here in the audience is, do you know anyone or do you yourself have a mobility issue and impairment? It's one of the things that we seem to find out, especially as our projects have gotten bigger. It seems like somehow, as much as we try to ask, and maybe if we need to go door to door, it's just to get someone will come to us and say, well, wait a minute, I have someone come in and get me, whatever Tuesdays because I need, dialysis, or I'm going to physical therapy, and I don't drive, but they need to get me. I can't walk, here. It's like, and we really need to know that. And the sooner we know that, the more we can do as we prepare for that, so we get there, so we can accommodate people as much as possible. it does make it much more difficult when we show up, our contractor shows up and someone tells us at that point in time, we'll still do as much as we can to do it, but oftentimes they come with a plan and now their plan is sometimes blown up. And even if for no other reason than just happy contractors are usually more accommodating contractors. When they show up and stuff, and first thing you do is disrupt their plan, and they're starting to wonder about, am I going to finish? What do I need to do? Do I have the crews available to accomplish this? All of a sudden they just don't seem to be as willing. And if for no other reason, that's otherwise good for us to do that, because if we can notify them ahead of time, I've never found a contractor that's not willing to work on something, as long as they're otherwise given that information. So please reach out to us. Like I said, if it's not even yourself, but you have a neighbor you're even concerned about, let us know. I mean, we'll knock on doors and stuff and just even verify and find out from people too if we need to. But we're really looking for some feedback from that. So we'll do as much as we can to accommodate people. These days, I'm not sure what you can say much about mail delivery. I'm not sure mine shows up every day anymore. But with that, we don't anticipate this project is going to create an interruption in your mail service, but do need to identify and be clear on what we define that as. And by interruption, we mean like project-wide interruption, which would then the Postal Service would tell us, hey, we can't deliver mail through this area, and that would prompt us to put up temporary mailboxes. We don't anticipate that to happen. However, your postal carrier, is given the leeway to determine whether or not to deliver your particular mail on any particular day, depending upon the conditions that exist there. So, for example, if the contractor's there and they're putting in one of the utilities and there's a big open trench there and they don't feel safe in that area, they may not deliver your mail that day. Typically then it would come in the next day, or maybe these days 3 days later. I don't know what their schedule is, but it typically shows up then the very next time that they come around. We don't consider that an interruption. That's unfortunate, just kind of what happens there, and it's it's a case by case basis. So simply because your mail doesn't show up for a day, doesn't mean that it's been interrupted. And if we know once Postal Service tells us of an issue, but that's also their call whether or not they feel they can deliver it, we'll definitely be sending out letters notifying people that we'll be putting up temporary boxes, and we'll tell you where they'll be located and make sure that you have access to those. If for whatever reason it seems like your mail is interrupted, more frequently, unfortunately, there's really little we can do. We like to know if you don't mind telling us, because it's good to know. But really, it becomes we're going to have to ask you to call the Postal Service to try to straighten it out, because we can't dictate to them what they need to do. So hopefully that kind of clarifies that, because I'm sure someone along the time about their mail. Landscaping and other things that you may have in the right of way, because we're otherwise working at, we'll utilize the entirety of the right of way. If you do have something there, like an electric fence for your pet, or some sort of power, maybe you have a light out, towards your mailbox, sprinklers, anything like that may be buried there. We do ask you to remove those items, because we can't be responsible. Our contractor can't be responsible for that. They're going to come in with a backhoe and dig. It's a lot to ask for them to try to use that large equipment and try to work around some of these things. So we'll be asking you to pull those things out. When we get into the spring, before the contractor shows up, probably in that time of utility relocates, the city staff will come out. We'll send staff out to mark the right of way so you'll know where it is. And then we'll just ask you everything from those lath that are put in the ground to the road, that if you have something there that you remove it. And then it's otherwise other way. And mind you, if you don't care about it, I'm not saying you have to remove it. If you've got an old sprinkler system you've never used, fast and don't plan on it, that's going to be nothing for a backhoe to tear out and do that. So we're not trying to create extra work if you have that scenario. But if you have something that you want to use and otherwise put back in, we do ask you to pull up, or it's most likely going to be damaged and removed. And I believe this is lastly is the restoration. Who's responsible for restoration? Kind of after the project wraps up and we get into the following spring, a lot of times we'll get phone calls about what's otherwise happening there, because the grass isn't always taken, and in some cases it just doesn't. Sometimes it's depending upon when they got to that part of the project, if it was seeded late in the season, and the later in the seasons we typically have the contractor come back in the spring and overseed. But the contractor's really just going to add the topsoil, they're going to seed it, fertilize it, and they'll put some matting down to help with that. But once they've otherwise completed that, we always ask the residents, just like you're maintaining it now, to maintain it then. And that will require, some additional watering, because with regular watering and regular mowing, it should come out all right. Though I'll guarantee you the first thing you're going to see after that seeing is going to be weeds. And people call and will often say, well, I don't know what kind of seed mixture these people are using, but it's clearly not the right one. The problem is that the soil alone, because it's going to be an aggregate of what people have in their yards right now and possibly some, material from another job or something like that they put back in here, depending on the suitability of it. There are millions of weed seeds in that soil when they put it back in. And of course, now it's just ripe for germination when it comes back and they put it in there and do that. So the first thing you'll see are those weeds. But I can nearly guarantee is if you mow them regularly and you water it regularly, your lawn will come in. And I tried to look for some photos that I had from a recent project. There were two opposite houses, opposite corners, and the one you could hardly tell, and the other one was weeds about waist high. And you can tell which one kind of complained about the contractor, and it's like there's same seed mixture, same crews. It was all done in the same day within hours of one another. It was just really the care that the homeowner took towards it. And I realize it is a little bit more work to do that. I wish we could just give everybody their 30-year lawn back when we're done, but unfortunately we can't. So we do ask for your help to get that started. So we will come back the following year to touch up some, because there will most likely be some dead spots that occur up, and we'll have our contractors come and touch that up. But it's not really our intent then to come back and completely reseed it. We've actually tried that on some projects, and it's really just comes to be the same result. Homeowner who didn't take care of it the first time doesn't take care of it the second time, and then just says, I don't know who these people are you hiring, but they can't grow grass. So just like to get that one out there, because it does become, it takes a lot of staff time to follow up on these things after the project is complete. And with that, kind of the reason probably most people are here, really just kind of here to answer any other questions you have, but that's all I had to present for that. Oh, I guess there was one thing we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. If you all have gotten the letter by now, and so you have our contact info, one of the things we really need, and it's not because it's going to cost anything or have any impact on the final design, is an inspection of your home. The guys here, Dan and Jason, are the ones that do those ahead of the design so that we can see and be sure. What we'll look at is where are your utilities leaving the house in the basement, right? I mean, because it's not always perfectly honest or perfectly obvious from outside where that happens, and we want to do it in such a way that we don't design the new utilities on one end of your property, and for some reason they're coming out the end that it's not real logical. So we need to see that. It's a pretty quick. How long would you say you spend in a home?
On average, 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah.
If residents have a few more questions, then it obviously takes longer.
And that's the other thing, is that it's a good place to jump off with some questions that you might not have asked yet, because they're going to be the ones out there watching the contractor, making sure everything gets done well for us and for you on the right of way side, and as you connect up to the property line. So that if that hasn't happened, it has to happen before the project. So call sooner than later, because it'll help our design process and have it done right. And then the more time we have between now and when construction starts to talk through things, that's just going to help resolve any issues that are found. In this area, I don't really expect any big surprises. I mean, what are we expecting? Because we don't see some pumps pumping into basement, slop sinks and stuff like that around here, because there's no wet basements.
No, nothing's been surprising.
Yeah.
Like that so far.
I did, because of the fact that these guys pretty much on the job site, so you give out your cell numbers to everybody, right? I did send you a slide if you want to put all our contact up there, if you want to. I know that's our main department numbers,